Next on the chopping block for topics suggested by you guys is Warframe's damage system. This topic is very in-depth, and the information can at times be misinterpreted or explained incorrectly even by veteran players, which I make no claim of being. This video will not go into weaknesses or resistances certain enemies have, but instead is geared towards newer players and will focus on teaching them about the different damage types and what each damage type does. Warframe has three categories that damage can be categorized into, those being physical damage, which includes impact, puncture, and slash, elemental damage, which includes cold, electricity, heat, and toxin, and the third being combined elements, which includes blast, corrosive, gas, magnetic, radiation, and viral. Every weapon and ability in Warframe falls into one of the damage types I just mentioned. So with this video, we're going to break each one down and quickly go over them. To start, let's talk about physical damage. For most of the weapons in Warframe, their base damage is made up of a combination of impact, puncture, and slash. However, some replace physical damage with either elemental or combination elemental damage types. If you have a weapon that falls into that category, physical damage mods such as those that increase impact, puncture, and slash will not affect that weapon. But like I said, for most weapons, this isn't the case. In addition to the three basic physical damage types that most weapons have, elemental damage can be added on top of the base damage through mods. As previously mentioned, there are four primary elemental damage types: heat, cold, electricity, and toxin. Now, as I said, you can add these damage types to weapons via mods when applied alone, meaning they are the only mod on there. But if a second elemental damage mod is added to a weapon, this is where combination elements are created. Depending on which two elements of the four you combined, it will result in one of 6 different combination elements. Mixing heat and cold will result in blast, electricity and toxin creates corrosive, heat and toxin combine into gas, cold and electricity result in magnetic, heat and electricity create radiation, and cold and toxin create viral. Now, as long as you were paying attention to the first couple minutes of this video, you understand all the element and damage types when it comes to bare bone basics, but I'm certain you want to know what each one does. Each damage type has a unique status effect or proc, which is an additional effect that triggers at random based on the status chance found in the weapon statistics. A weapon will always deal any elemental and physical damage installed via mods, but only triggers the status effects based on status chance. As I've said numerous times in this video, Warframe has 13 different damage types, those being impact, puncture, slash, cold, electricity, heat, toxin, blast, corrosive, gas, magnetic, radiation, and viral. So let's quickly run through what each one does when it procs its status effect. Impact produces a stagger or knockback effect. Puncture, when procced, applies the status effect called weakened, causing the affected target to deal 30% less damage. Slash, when applied, causes a bleed, which is a damage over time effect that does 35% of your weapon's base damage 7 times over 6 seconds. Cold applies a status effect called freeze, which reduces the target's movement speed and attack rate by 50% for 6 seconds. Electricity applies a status effect called chain lightning, dealing damage equal to the average of your base damage and electricity damage to the target and to surrounding enemies, as well as briefly stunning them. Heat applies a status effect called Ignite, which deals 50% of your base damage plus 50% of your weapon's heat damage 7 times over 6 seconds, also putting them into a state of panic, which is basically a stun. Toxin applies a status effect called Poison, which deals 50% of your base damage plus 50% of your weapon's toxin damage 9 times over 8 seconds, but unlike the others can stack multiple times on the same target. Blast applies an explosive knockdown, which is different than Impact's knockback. This effect will knock down and stun all enemies within 5 meters of the target. Corrosive applies corrosion, which permanently degrades the target's current armor value by 25%. Corrosion can be applied multiple times to a target, but the 25% reduction applies to the new armor value instead of the initial armor value. Since this status effect is a little confusing, I'll give a slightly more detailed explanation. If a target has, for example, an initial armor value of 100, the first application of corrosion will reduce the target's armor value to 75. Applying corrosion again will reduce that value to 56.25 and not 50. This effect can be added time and time again, but because it only takes 25% of the new value, it will never quite reach 0, but you'll probably kill the target before you have to worry about that. Next on the list is gas. This applies an effect called Poison Cloud, which applies 2 unique instances of toxin damage, not gas damage. The first instance does immediate damage equal to the average of your base damage and toxin damage. The second applies 9 ticks of damage over 8 seconds, equal to your weapon's toxin damage. This means even though gas is created with toxin and heat, it scales much greater based on toxin damage, and the heat damage really doesn't affect how much gas damage you do. It should also be noticed that gas can be applied multiple times to a target and does stack. Magnetic is the next on the list, which applies a status effect called Disrupt, which reduces the target's current shields and maximum shield capacity by 75% over a duration of 4 seconds. After that 4 seconds is up, that 75% goes away, but the damage you dealt during the effect will remain. Radiation is next, and that applies Confusion, which makes the affected enemies vulnerable to friendly fire for 12 seconds. And last on the list is Viral. This applies the status effect called Virus, which reduces the target's current and maximum health by 50% for 6 seconds. This effect does not stack, but can be applied multiple times to refresh that 6-second timer. Viral, like magnetic damage, if that 6-second timer is not refreshed, all damage is applied, but the 50% reduction is removed. Now, one thing I want to mention, now that I've provided you with a ton of information in a very quick-fire fashion, is that this video could have been a lot longer, where I discuss where enemies are resistant or weak to certain damage types, but as I stated, this was more focused on teaching newer players, and I may post a more in-depth guide in the future with the more in-depth information. But I think this video covered what it intended to, which was just that, the basics. If you have any further questions on the topic of damage, be sure to ask in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as I can, and I'm sure others will do that as well. In addition, down in the description is a link to a public spreadsheet where I have a list of suggestions from you guys on topics you want me to cover. Also, in that spreadsheet, you can find additional pages with a bit more information on the topics for each of the videos I've done. But if you have a suggestion that you don't see in that spreadsheet, be sure to let me know in the comments as well. Also, down in the description is a link to the Multilux community Discord, where you can come and hang out with me and others and just talk video games or anything for that matter. So if that interests you, you know where to find the server. As always, I want to thank you guys for your continued support. Every time I post a video, you guys shower me with love and amazing feedback, and I can't thank you enough for that. But with all that said, I think it's time for me to get out of here. Say my name is Matt, and I'll see you guys next time.